Antes de empezar, quisiera hacer dos anuncios. El primero tiene que ver con esta noche. Se confirma una recepción en el Ayuntamiento de Bilbao, que está, de San Sebastián, que está al otro lado de la bahía, o sea, está justo en la parte antigua. Y el otro anuncio, ahí estamos convocados a las 8 de la tarde. Y el otro anuncio que desearía hacer es que, Benigno Pendás, que debería estar en esta mesa, que es el director del Centro de Estudios Políticos y Constitucionales, ha puesto malo y no puede acompañarnos. Quiero aprovechar la ocasión para agradecer a Benigno su predisposición siempre a cooperar no solamente con la Asociación Española de Ciencia Política, sino con la ciencia política. Yo creo que desde que él está en la dirección del centro, nuestra presencia allí como especialidad ha sido muchísimo más intensa que con direcciones anteriores. Yo creo que eso es evidente para todos nosotros. Casi todos hemos pasado o nos han invitado a participar en algún seminario o en algún acto. Me parece que esta referencia merece ser subrayada. Bueno, nos acompañan también en la mesa Ana Arrieta, que está a mi izquierda, que es la vicerrectora de campus de Guipúzcoa, de la Universidad del País Vasco, a quien desearía aprovechar para agradecerle su bienvenida. Y, la verdad es que estamos encantados con las instalaciones que nos han proporcionado. Josu Erkoreka, que representa aquí al Gobierno vasco, es el consejero de Administración Pública y Justicia y portavoz del Gobierno vasco. Todos le conocemos del Congreso de los Diputados, donde estuvo, ¿cuántos años estuviste? Casi 13 años de diputado, y estuviste de portavoz también, una parte muy importante. Y en la extrema izquierda de la mesa, aunque es puramente espacial, está Raquel Vaspinto, que es la presidenta de una asociación hermana, de la Xii Aecpa, que es la Asociación Portuguesa de Ciencia Política. Ya viene siendo una tradición que el presidente o presidenta, en este caso, de la Asociación Portuguesa, está presente en la inauguración de nuestros congresos, y a la inversa, en la organización de los congresos de la Asociación Portuguesa, pues suele estar el presidente o la presidenta, que todavía no veo ninguna, pero espero que la haya pronto, la presidenta de la Asociación de Ciencia Política. Bien, dicho esto, y antes de que yo les dé la palabra, va a ser un acto muy breve, porque luego lo que queremos es pasar rápidamente a la conferencia inaugural. Sí me gustaría comenzar dando muchísimas las gracias a quienes dentro del comité organizador se han dedicado a preparar este congreso, y en particular a la directora, que es Arantxa Elizondo. Muchísimas gracias, Arantxa. Sé que han dedicado muchísimas horas en el comité organizador, que hasta el último momento han tenido problemas, como suele ser habitual, en gran parte también por culpa nuestra, de la propia asociación, que no les dábamos información suficiente para preparar esto o aquello. Desde luego sé que el trabajo que ha costado y que está costando ponerlo en marcha, y por tanto yo creo que represento a todos los miembros de la asociación cuando digo que de verdad muchísimas gracias por vuestro trabajo. También quiero incorporar mis agradecimientos, evidentemente, a Kim Brugué, como director del Comité Científico del Congreso, que también lleva, y a quienes representan cada una de las áreas de especialidad, que llevan todas ellas. Es decir, que todo montar un congreso, como todos los que en algún momento hemos tenido que hacerlo, lleva mucho trabajo y lleva sobre todo una tarea tremenda de consumo de tiempo, ¿no? Se pierde mucho tiempo en estas cosas, y muchas veces es un trabajo muy poco agradecido y, por supuesto, absolutamente nada remunerado. Hay algunos datos sobre la asociación y sobre este congreso que nos está pasando Arantxa. Dentro de uno de los ítems de los datos que ella presenta, como puede ser en este caso pues el número de mesas, las inscripciones que hay, las ponencias. A mí hay un punto que me parece que es muy relevante, que vendrá un poco más adelante, que es el que se refiere a las personas que no pueden estar aquí y que siempre suelen venir a nuestros congresos. Es decir, nuestros compañeros fallecidos en estos 2 últimos años, y también aquellos que, bueno, que siguen con nosotros, evidentemente, espero que durante muchísimo tiempo, pero con una dedicación menor, que son las personas, ¿no?, que se van jubilando en diferentes departamentos universitarios, muchos de los cuales pues, han tenido una importantísima contribución a la ciencia política. Aquí veo ahora a Francisco Letamendia, por ejemplo, quien no conoce al doctor Letamendia y su obra, pero muchos otros, todos ellos yo creo que importantísimos, pero que, como he sabido, siguen formando parte de la Aecpa hasta que ellos buenamente deseen. O sea, que realmente es un hasta luego, es decir, que no es tan grave como, por lo menos no es como en el otro, no es en el otro caso. Bien, dicho esto, y reiterando mi agradecimiento a Ana Arrieta, la vicerrectora, y al consejero, me gustaría cerrar mi intervención muy brevemente, porque ya me queda poco tiempo, muy brevemente sobre el tema del Congreso y por qué hemos elegido ese tema. Como es sabido, los congresos suelen organizarse siempre en torno a un lema. El lema, por ejemplo, que se ha elegido para el próximo congreso de la IPSA, de la Asociación Internacional de Ciencia Política en Estambul, es el tema de la desigualdad, que me parece que está muy bien elegido. Política y desigualdad, que es una de las características fundamentales del mundo en el que vivimos. Yo creo que es muy representativo de algo que está ocurriendo y sobre lo que tenemos que reflexionar. Y nosotros el tema que hemos elegido es el poder. Y en particular las nuevas formas en las que el poder se articula hoy. Por eso el lema es una interrogación, que todos lo habéis visto. ¿Dónde está hoy el poder? Que es una pregunta de investigación que realmente no tiene respuesta posible, pero que realmente yo creo que a todos nos tiene que seducir para buscarle alguna respuesta. Yo creo que todos, desde cada una de nuestras especialidades, tendremos que atender a este hecho. Hoy el poder parece que está cada vez más alejado de las instancias de decisión política formal, que son aquellas que estudiamos, que solemos estudiar de una manera además muy concentrada. Hoy el poder pues, ha emigrado a otros lugares. Lo que se trata es de saber cuáles son esos lugares donde ha emigrado, si es la economía o si es algo que va más allá también de la economía, cómo interacciona los aspectos culturales con los estrictamente económicos, con los geopolíticos, etcétera. Yo creo que ahí se abre un campo verdaderamente fascinante para el estudio de lo político asociado a lo que yo creo que consideramos que es que desde siempre hemos visto que es lo que mueve lo político, que es precisamente esta idea de poder. Por eso cuando nos preguntamos sobre quién gobierna y cómo se gobierna, muchas veces perdemos de vista esas otras instancias en las que se encarama el poder, que sirven como elemento explicativo de fenómenos que indudablemente se escapan generalmente a nuestra observación. Por eso yo creo que tenemos que comenzar a enhebrar una conversación nueva con disciplinas afines, disciplinas que pueden aportarnos también una visión de estos problemas más profunda de aquella, o por lo menos que nos pueden complementar la visión que nosotros tenemos. Bueno, acabo señalando que vivimos tiempos apasionantes en este fin de semana. Leí el otro día, en este fin de semana se estaban resolviendo cuestiones tales como el nuevo rescate a Grecia, es decir, el futuro de la Unión Europea, se está jugando en estos últimos días. Está la cuestión de si se llega a un acuerdo o no con Irán, que es otro tema que va a condicionar decisivamente el mundo de las relaciones internacionales. Y está el problema sobre el que sabe muchísimo Raquel Vaspinto, nuestra amiga portuguesa, que es el tema de China, la crisis, digamos, de la bolsa en China, que puede tener consecuencias importantísimas para el propio crecimiento chino, y eso evidentemente tiene también consecuencias para todos los demás. Estamos en unos momentos donde vuelve otra vez la geopolítica, que tenemos otra vez que atender a cuestiones que parecían que no eran tan inminentes. Resumiendo, tenemos todos los problemas que siempre hemos analizado y muchos otros nuevos, que no sabemos muy bien cómo encajar con los viejos. Por tanto, bueno, nuestros desafíos no son pocos, pero como todos sabemos, los politólogos estamos de moda y, por tanto, cada vez nos escuchan más, cada vez estamos más presentes en los medios y, por tanto, yo lo que querría es estimularlos para que sigamos estando en los medios, para que sigan escuchándonos como nos están escuchando y para que acabemos avanzando en nuestras investigaciones. Bueno, y dicho esto, doy brevemente la palabra a Raquel para que nos salude. Muchísimas gracias.
Olá, muito boa noite. Em nome da Associação Portuguesa de Ciência Política, é com muito gosto que estamos aqui hoje. Queria, em primeiro lugar, agradecer aos nossos colegas espanhóis, aqui com o Fernando na mesa, dizer que temos tentado, nos últimos anos, fomentar as relações entre a comunidade científica portuguesa e a comunidade científica espanhola. É, por vezes, impressionante ver como é que duas comunidades científicas que são vizinhas, ao mesmo tempo se conhecem tão pouco, e por isso também aproveitaria esta oportunidade para apelar a que os colegas espanhóis submetessem propostas para o nosso próximo congresso em Lisboa, março de 2016. Por último, e porque tinha prometido à Arantxa que as minhas palavras seriam muito breves, queria agradecer à Arantxa e a todo o comitê organizador deste congresso. Queria agradecer a San Sebastián pelo apoio e pela decisão de estar aqui nesta cidade que é belíssima. E, por último, agradecer aos colegas espanhóis o convite para aqui estar uma vez mais e desejar a todos um congresso muito partilhado, porque realmente o tema escolhido não pode ser mais pertinente e importante. Muito obrigada, muchas gracias.
Arratsaldeon guztioi, eta kongresu honetako irekita ekitaldian ongi etorriak izan zaitezte. Buenas tardes a todos y todas. Mi más cordial bienvenida en nombre de la Universidad del País Vasco, Euskal Herriko Unibertsitatea, al acto inaugural del 12º Congreso Nacional de Ciencia Política y de la Administración, organizado por la Asociación Española, como se ha comentado anteriormente, de Ciencia Política y de Administración, en colaboración con nuestra universidad. Es un honor para mí participar en este acto de inauguración y, aunque parezca una frase retórica, visto el contenido de las materias que aquí se van a tratar y de la calidad de los ponentes, pues es realmente un honor participar y dar la bienvenida. Para nuestra universidad constituye un reto, pero también un orgullo ser la sede organizadora este año de un evento que, como digo, de estas características. No quisiera dejar de pasar la oportunidad de agradecer al comité organizador y, de nuevo, a la persona de la profesora Arantxa Elizondo y a todas las personas que se han implicado en ello. Mila esker guztioi. Y por mi parte, no pretendo prolongar esta breve y afectuosa bienvenida más de lo necesario. Entiendo que, bueno, pues estén ya deseosos de alguna manera en escuchar al ponente de la conferencia inaugural, profesor Gero. Mis mejores deseos para el desarrollo de sus sesiones de trabajo y también les deseo lo mejor en el plano personal durante su estancia en Donostia. Espero que disfruten de las jornadas y también de estar entre nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Josur Kureka, por favor.
Gracias, Fernando. Bueno, yo quisiera comenzar también dándoles la bienvenida, en primer lugar, a Euskadi, al País Vasco, y expresando mi satisfacción por participar en el acto inaugural de este 12º Congreso de la Asociación de la Ciencia Española de Ciencia Política y de la Administración, que este año, el año 2015, se convoca bajo el sugerente lema de dónde radica el poder hoy en día, ¿no? Bueno, no quisiera avanzar más sin recordar, creo que es un dato a tener en cuenta, que fue también en Euskadi donde comenzó la serie de congresos que alcanza la 12ª edición en esta ocasión, ¿no? Fue en Euskadi en Bilbao, en diciembre del año 1994, cuando tuvo lugar en un clima político diferente, esto es claro, en un clima académico también distinto, seguramente, porque el horizonte de preocupaciones entonces era otro. No hay más que ver el contraste entre el lema que rigió aquel evento y el que preside este congreso. Entonces se hablaba de la política y democracia en los años 90. Hoy hablamos de la ubicación del poder, con una interrogante al principio y al final, ¿no? Y bueno, veo que después de 11 ediciones volvemos al punto de partida en un clima también en lo meteorológico distinto. No en vano aquel de Bilbao se celebró en diciembre y este tiene lugar en Donosti, donde hay playa, y en pleno mes de julio, ¿no? Bueno, he podido comprobar al analizar el programa de trabajo que tiene una agenda que al mismo tiempo es intensa y extensa, ¿no? Es intensa en lo temporal porque van a tener que desarrollarla en 2 jornadas y media, y es extensa en lo material, porque he visto que abarcan nada menos que 77 grupos de trabajo diferentes articulados en torno a 6 grandes áreas que se corresponden más o menos con las grandes áreas en las que se articula el ámbito de conocimiento situado en torno a la ciencia de la política y de la administración, ¿no? Desde la teoría política hasta las relaciones internacionales, pasando por los actores políticos, las instituciones políticas, los comportamientos políticos y la gestión pública y las políticas públicas. Les voy a hacer una confesión. Desde la experiencia política que he ido acumulando en los últimos años y desde mi formación, que es jurídica y no politológica, me ha sorprendido, y debo reconocérselo a los organizadores, la capacidad de síntesis y de abstracción que han tenido para concretar en un lema tan claro, tan gráfico, un campo tan vasto de materias, tan heterogéneo de materias con las que van a ser objeto de tratamiento a lo largo del Congreso, ¿no? ¿Dónde reside el poder hoy entre nosotros? Además, esta interrogante, lo ha apuntado el director, resulta particularmente sugerente porque a mí personalmente, cuando he leído el lema, primero me ha sugerido que quien formula este lema da por supuesto que el poder no se encuentra hoy donde residía ayer. Por tanto, ha habido un cambio, una traslación de la ubicación del poder, ¿no? No está hoy donde estaba ayer. Y, por tanto, es preciso preguntarse a ver dónde está hoy, ¿no? Y, al mismo tiempo, además, la pregunta sugiere otra segunda reflexión, y es que la ubicación del poder hoy no es tan evidente como la de ayer, porque antes parecía que no había que preguntarse, pero hoy hay que preguntarse, seguramente porque el poder se manifiesta a través de procedimientos y de medios más sutiles, mucho más sofisticados, ¿no? Yo, en más de una década de experiencia política, puedo confesarles que tengo mis intuiciones, pero no soy capaz de dar respuesta hoy en día a esta pregunta. Mi batalla histórica, por mi formación jurídica, ha sido la de procurar que el poder no se concentrara en excesivas manos, procurar que la excesiva concentración no se produzca. ¿Por qué? Porque, bueno, he creído siempre en la división de poderes, en los mecanismos de checks and balances, pero si el poder ha escapado del entorno institucional, entonces todo esto ya no sirve para nada. La división de poderes y los checks and balances son principios que sirven para regir el poder, el funcionamiento del poder, en tanto en cuanto el poder radique en las instituciones, pero si ha emigrado, como gráficamente decía el director, pues seguramente todo este bagaje conceptual ya no lo sirve. Yo confío en que pasado mañana, cuando finalice el Congreso, puedan ilustrarme un poco sobre el particular, puedan no responder a la pregunta que ya ha dicho el director, que es probablemente irrespondible la pregunta, pero sí que me confirmen a ver si mi lucha por procurar que el poder esté cada vez menos concentrado, que esté cada vez menos concentrado o más disperso en manos diferentes, si este proceso podemos dar por confirmado o no, si esto se confirma o no. Me gustaría que me dijeran que sí, pero vamos a ver qué es lo que resulta de los trabajos del Congreso. Eskerrik asko.
Sí, vamos a pasar a la conferencia inaugural, que va a estar impartida por Rodney Hero. Rodney Hero es el presidente de la Asociación Americana de Ciencia Política, es estudioso fundamentalmente de movimientos sociales dentro del mundo de la política estadounidense, en particular los movimientos, digamos, de origen latino, pero también otros movimientos políticos y sociales. Tiene una gran presencia en el debate público de su país de origen y digamos, aquello que le hemos pedido que nos hable, o aquello sobre lo que le hemos pedido que nos hable, es fundamentalmente de, bueno, cuáles son las diferentes discusiones dentro de la Asociación Americana de Ciencia Política en torno a lo que debe ser la ciencia política, aquello de lo que se tiene que ocupar, cuáles son las discrepancias fundamentales respecto de nuestro objeto, respecto de nuestros métodos. En definitiva, bueno, yo creo que un tema que es un tema que a nosotros como politólogos nos interesa enormemente. Rodney, thanks very much. You have the floor.
Quiero aquí.
No, aquí está bien. Sí.
Hola, de los Estados Unidos. I'm very happy. Voy a hablar en inglés porque mi español no es muy bien. Mis abuelas eran de España, de Vasco y Islas Canarias, pero yo no puedo hablar muy bien. So voy a hablar en inglés. First, I'd like to thank all of you very much for being here. I very much appreciate the invitation. I want to thank Fernando very much for the invitation, Juan Rodriguez for the invitation. My mother's apellido era Rodriguez, so thank you very much. And I want to thank Arantxa so much for all her hospitality, her invitation, and all her effort to communicate with me. At times, I know she had a lot to do with regard to the conference, and having to deal with emails from someone whose Spanish is very bad and who was otherwise an annoyance. I very much appreciate your tolerance and your patience with me. My wife, Kathy, wants to thank all of you as well. We're very pleased to be here. Let me just start by saying, again, what an honor it is to be here. I'm very pleased to be here for a variety of reasons, but this is a very special event for me in a number of ways. I think I may be, you can correct me, I think I may be the first president of the American Political Science Association to speak to this conference, and if so, I'm especially honored to be here. Again, it's a very thrilling to be here for a whole variety of reasons. My wife and I were in San Sebastian for the first time 2 years ago, and we loved it. It's a beautiful area. I grew up in Florida. In fact, 3 states I lived in the United States, Florida, Colorado, y California, tienen nombres españoles. So I tengo una afección con España. So I feel very special to be here, so thank you very much for the invitation. What I'm going to talk about today is several things, and I will try and be fairly brief because I've been told that you have a reception to go to, and receptions are often more important than listening to a conference speaker. So I understand and I respect that tremendously. But what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today are some challenges of political science in the current world of political science, and especially as we are experiencing them in the United States. I was asked to address several questions, and I will do so, and happily do so, as much as time permits me to do so. The questions I was asked to talk about a little bit were the place of political science today after many years of methodological and other forms of intellectual disagreements. And as political scientists, you know whereof I speak. Secondly, to talk a little bit about the impact of questions of big data and new technological developments as they might be influencing political science, and I will talk about that relatively briefly, partly because I think the first 2 points are actually interconnected somewhat. A third point I will talk about is the social usefulness or social utility of political science and the responsibility of political scientists in the current world. And let me just say, I think different countries of the world see these things differently. I think in some respects, from what I understand, political science may in some ways be more valued in Spain than it is in the United States for complicated reasons. But in any case, I will touch upon those topics as well as others as I'm able to. Let me just start out by saying that the several questions that I was asked to address are in many ways, I think, somewhat interconnected or interrelated with each other. They are significant and they are intensely discussed in the United States. I think there's a lot of disagreement among American political scientists about the questions that I will be addressing. And let me just emphasize to you that while I will give you my perspective, I will also alert you or warn you that if you talk to 5 or 10 or whatever number of political scientists from the United States, you might in fact hear something very different than what I will tell you today. So this is not the last word by any stretch of the imagination in terms of how to think about contemporary political science. But one of the first question then that I will try and address briefly is again the place of political science today after these many years of ontological and methodological debates. I guess what I would say is that in many respects, those debates that you are familiar with, probably in Spain, and certainly that I have been familiar with for many years in the United States, they continue. They fundamentally continue in significant kinds of ways. Some of you may have heard of, there have been several developments in the United States over the last 30 or 40 years or so in terms of debates or discussions within political science. There was, in the 1960s and early 1970s, an era where there was this organization called the New Political Science, which wanted to challenge the existing practice of political science in the United States, arguing that there was too much attention to relatively unimportant things, that there needed to be greater attention to relevance, that is, day-to-day practical politics. And that movement certainly was influential for some period of time, but over time, I think it's fair to say its impact kind of ebbed somewhat over time. But then there was another iteration of that, and as you probably know, with many issues of this sort, they tend to reemerge every so often in somewhat different form, but they reemerge from time to time. In the year 2000, there was this movement within American political science that some of you may have heard of, perestroika, which is basically the name of that movement within American political science took its name from the Russian, the Gorbachev era, the notion of perestroika, arguing for more openness and so on. What perestroika argued in the United States, and it still continues to be influential to this day in significant ways, and is, in some ways at the center of these debates, was the argument that political science in the United States had come to be dominated by certain kinds of quantitative analysis, a very heavy emphasis on quantitative analysis, fairly sophisticated quantitative analysis that, according to the perestroika critics, was very detached from politics and was a hegemony, basically a methodological hegemony that had taken hold in American political science and was manifested in a variety of ways, but perhaps most distinctly within the major journals of the American Political Science Association. A major journal, or the major journal, as you may know, of the American Political Science Association is the American Political Science Review. And the American Political Science Review was criticized, and continues to be criticized, I guess I would say, for, again, having a very strong emphasis on certain kinds of quantitative research that, again, is argued to kind of dominate the discipline much more than is representative of the discipline as a whole. So that led to a great deal of tension between various groups. So one of the things that happened at the time was that there was a movement that some people had undertaken actually that preceded the movement of perestroika that was called Take Back the American Political Science Review, Take Back the APSR, which emerged in again, the 1990s or so. Then perestroika developed itself, and I don't know how much you may know about it, but it was this kind of anonymous provocateur who developed some arguments or claims or criticism of American political science and stated that there needed to be some fundamental change in the American Political Science Review, in the study of political science in the United States, and indeed in terms of the governance structure of the American Political Science Association. The way that the American Political Science Association selects its officials, the president, including myself and so on, had not and is not through an open electoral process. And the criticism was that there needs to be competitive elections for there to be a more genuine political science. How can we study democracy without practicing democracy, was the criticism. Well, that was a very contentious issue. And, for what it's worth, I would tell you, I was on the side that opposed the elections. And part of the reason why I opposed the elections was because of the concern that certain kinds of views or perspectives would not be represented through an open electoral process. That is, some of the research that I do, and a number of colleagues and friends of mine do, the circles that I work in, I study race and ethnicity in American politics, the situation of Latinos and blacks and other groups in the United States. And our view was that having an open electoral process would turn it into a kind of popularity contest rather than focus more directly on representation of a variety of groups and intellectual perspectives in the discipline. So interestingly, in some respects, scholars who study race and ethnicity in the United States and who feel like the concerns and the issues that we address had been underrepresented or maybe not fully respected in political science, felt like moving to an open electoral process would in fact further diminish the standing or the place, if you will, of scholars who study race and ethnicity in the United States. So there was actually, it wasn't even talked about that much until in a couple of meetings where these issues emerged. But in any case, that was one dimension of how some of these issues have played out in American political science. But more directly and more fundamentally, there are a couple ways I think it's correct to say in which the American Political Science Association then addressed some of these epistemological differences. And let me just mention some of them to you. One was, there was a creation of a new journal. Although this journal had already been in the works, there was a creation of a new journal. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a journal called Perspectives on Politics. The journal Perspectives on Politics was created in large part to speak to what were thought to be more relevant questions, but also not to require or not to impose the same kind of epistemological emphasis on high-powered quantitative analysis. To address accessible, bigger questions. The critique is that the quantitative political science in the United States too often focused on fairly narrow, specific questions. Now, those who practice that don't agree that that is the case, of course, but that was the nature of the critique of that. So one approach to dealing with that was, again, the creation of this other journal. In addition, when the time has come from every so often where the editorship of the journals is going to be determined or reassigned, there have been lots of debates about who would or should be the editors of the journals of the American Political Science Review, because again the sense or the concern has been is that who is the editor or the group of editors. And in the last number of years, there have been a group of editors that we have had that has oftentimes engendered quite a bit of concern and a conflict. In fact, as I speak, as I talk to you today, we are in the process of considering who the next set of reviewers for the American Political Science Review will be. And there's a committee that I appointed that will be making that determination, and I don't know what their decision will be. It's not my role. It was my role to appoint them, but it was not my role to determine who that would be or what group that would be. So in any case, that's one set of issues that has occurred and that has shaped the debate in the United States about these epistemological kinds of questions. But there have been a couple of others that I guess I would note to you. One is that there was the creation about 12 years or so ago of another organized section. I don't know if you know how the American Political Science Association is structured, but we have a variety of what are called organized sections that focus on particular kinds of research. So one of the organized sections that I personally belong to is a section on race, ethnicity, and politics. All right. But there was also the creation of another section called qualitative methods. And that was another a way of trying to deal with these different kinds of epistemological differences that there are in the discipline. But along with that, there have been other kinds of developments that have been put in place to try and deal with these epistemological divides that are seen to be important in themselves, but also serve the purpose of I think indirectly, a latent kind of function, if you will, of addressing these epistemological tensions. One is the creation of other kinds of organized sections. In addition to the one on qualitative research, there has another one been created recently, for example, on class inequality in the United States. And as you may know, one of the issues that some of the Western countries, including the United States, are very concerned about these days is economic inequality. And so that was a new section that was created partly for purposes of studying what is and was thought to be an important substantive question, but it also, again, partly deals with these epistemological kinds of variations and differences. Another kind of development that has occurred over the last number of years in this regard is that various of these organized sections have begun having their own journals online. So one of the ways in which these tensions are being addressed is by finding, in a sense, alternative venues, if you will, for the outlet of certain kinds of research. So that is, again, yet another way in which these issues are addressed. Another thing that the American Political Science Association is currently dealing with has to do with the creation of a free online access journal. And interestingly, as a person who's currently involved in these matters, that has also been a source of contention within the association. The idea of the creation of this free online access journal was that we needed to have a way of publishing research more quickly than what we have in the past. That the traditional practices of publishing journal articles is, in the United States, and I assume in many of your journals, takes a very, very long time. An article might be submitted and may not appear for a year and a half, sometimes 2 years later. And the argument is that there's so much research being done, there's so many important questions that are out there to be addressed, that we need to have some additional venues, some alternative venues, to publish that research more quickly. And the American Political Science Association is currently working on that, on doing something along those lines. But without going into a great deal of detail, let me tell you that this has also been somewhat contentious, because what has occurred is that some scholars in certain areas feel like their research may not lend itself to the same kind of quick production and quick development as other kinds of research. So sometimes individuals who do more, quote, qualitative research feel like that even a new online access journal will, in a sense, advantage those who do more quantitative research. So rather than helping balance the different methodological approaches, it might, in fact, tilt it further in one direction. So these are just, a number of ongoing issues. In general, as you might ascertain from what I've said thus far, I think part of the tension within American political science is between individuals who think of political science should be more like economics or math or statistics versus, or in juxtaposition to, those who have a more humanities, historical focus. Again, these are not new. These are not new issues, but they have just undergone, I think, different developments and or manifestations over the last 10, 12, or 15 years. And so we see some of that occurring. A second point that I was asked to address, again, has to do with this question of big data culture and new technological tools. It's hard for me, as we are in the midst of these things, although they have been developing for some time, it's nonetheless at least somewhat difficult for me to make clear-cut judgments on these kinds of things. But let me just note a couple things. My sense, at least at this point, is that these new developments have, in a sense, refueled or been transformed or brought into the old debates. That is, that in a sense, those who use big data are individuals who used to use smaller data, large N studies and so on. So it's now simply been taken to another level, if you will, of complexity and or sophistication on the one hand, whereas those who have maintained that more of a humanities or history kind of focus, in a sense, feel threatened by that growth. So there has been that kind of those kinds of developments there that I guess I would note to you. So some of the ongoing debates, again, that I assume are fairly familiar to you, I would pose this way. Do we look at broad questions or narrow questions? Do we emphasize relevance or rigor? And we could think of a variety of other kinds of questions of that sort, which I think help us understand how the new developments have, in a sense, been another layer or grafted onto some of the older tensions within political science in the United States. At least that is my sense here. But, so one of the things that has happened in the United States, and again, it appears to be happening in other of the Western democracies, Western countries, has to do with the emergence of blogs, of various kinds of political blogs. And, the quality of those blogs in terms of serious political analysis, as you probably know, can differ dramatically. There are some that are very well done and very serious. There's one that is affiliated with the Washington Post, for example, that's called The Monkey Cage. Have any of you read The Monkey Cage? Okay, it's called The Monkey Cage, and I won't go into the reasons where that name came from. But it is a pretty serious kind of analysis that is undertaken there. And what it will often do, one of the components of what it does, is that there may be some issue in the popular culture in the United States that emerges, and scholars will draw on their own research and bring it to bear, and they can bring it to something like The Monkey Cage and publish it pretty quickly. Let me just give one example. It's actually somebody, a friend of mine who was involved in this particular question. There was a movie that came out in the United States within the last 6 months or so, the movie Selma. The movie Selma about Martin Luther King, And one of the issues that was presented in that movie had to do with Martin Luther King's relationship to Lyndon Johnson. As you know, Lyndon Johnson was the president of the United States during the Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King was a major civil rights leader. And the way it was portrayed in the movie was that Johnson was not very supportive or not very engaged in actually trying to encourage the civil rights movement. Well, some scholars, including a person who happens to be a friend of mine, had done some research on the relationship between Johnson and the civil rights movement, particularly Martin Luther King. And what that research had involved was looking at newspapers, black newspapers, newspapers published by blacks, by African Americans in the United States, and their portrayal of how they saw Lyndon Johnson. And in those newspaper coverages, it seemed pretty clear that the newspapers had a rather positive image of Lyndon Johnson's role in relationship to the civil rights movement and to Martin Luther King in particular. So, that's a way in which we are able to bring to bear political science research, I think in a very constructive and creative kind of way to bring it to bear for purposes of, again, practical significance and understanding politics within the larger culture, if you will. So there have been some of those are some of the kinds of developments that there have been over the last years. Again, by and large, I think there tends to be this kind of continuation of some of these other tensions, but we can see how it's not simple and straightforward. There's a great deal of difference or complexity, if you will, in the way these issues have developed. All right. A third question that I will look at has to do with the question about the social utility and the responsibility of political scientists, and how I think, I would try and give a couple of examples of how those things are thought about and have been thought about in the United States. There have been a couple of presidents of the American Political Science Association within the last decade who've spoken in their presidential addresses, who've spoken to these questions fairly directly. For example, some of you may know the work of Margaret Levy, who's a well-known comparative politics scholar in the United States. And the title of her presidential address was called "Why We Need a New Theory of Government." And in that, the argument is that we need a new theory of government because that's something that political scientists presumably are in a good position to try and come up with, recognizing that the theories of government that we have created don't always help us explain and understand things as well as we want to or need to. Nonetheless, she laid out a very thoughtful, I think, a sophisticated articulation of why speaking, trying to continuously think about things like, what are the institutional structures? What are the way we try and shape ideas, the way we try and reconfigure interests in a society to make government more representative, more effective, and to achieve the kinds of values that I think most people who support and believe in democratic processes and ends support. So it's a matter of how and why we need to continue doing that. Other presidential addresses over the last number of years have done this as well. One by Jane Mansbridge, who is a political theorist, talked about what is political science for? What is the purpose? What is the goal? And in many respects, she made some of the same kinds of arguments as did Margaret Levy. That is, what is at stake? What do we try and do in political science, in a sense, to make the world more governable, to help us live better with each other, within countries, across countries, and so on. So a very kind of, I think, thoughtful articulation of that. But there have also been some presidential addresses of the last 10, 15 years or so in the United States, where the presidents who've given those addresses have asked and have encouraged political scientists to be self-critical of ourselves as a discipline. We need to continuously be self-critical of ourselves as a discipline. That is, to what extent do we, in the way that we analyze, describe, and so on, make sense of the political world? To what extent do we are we blind to certain processes? Do we not think carefully enough about some? So, for example, back sometime in the 1980s, the president at that time, Charles Lindblom, wrote in his presidential address, basically said, we in the United States have developed this kind of rather comfortable pluralist interpretation of American politics, that there is this competition of groups, and there's this equilibrium that develops, and overall there's a certain kind of equilibrium that's essentially democratic procedurally and perhaps substantively. And we had kind of furthered that kind of thinking, perhaps, he argued, not being sufficiently self-critical of whether we were, thinking about these things in a sufficiently careful and thoughtful way. So he kind of chided, if you will, or criticized his fellow political scientists for not being sufficiently attentive to those kinds of considerations. Theodore Lowy, another political theorist, in his presidential address, he had a very provocative one called "How We Became What We Study." How we became what we study. And part of what he argued is that political science within the United States, and maybe in most countries, in a sense, we may tend to reflect the existing political regimes more than what we recognize, that certain kinds of research and research traditions become more dominant and or hegemonic at certain times in a country's history, and that the political science as a discipline may reflect that and reinforce that in certain ways without being fully aware of that. So again, trying to bring our attention and underscoring the importance of that. But thinking then about, in a more contemporary sense, though, one of the ongoing issues in American political science, I think it's fair to say, is again this question about to what extent should political scientists be political scientists in the sense of being somewhat detached from society, that you study things in a careful, systematic way and try and identify important questions and study them carefully and so on, but not necessarily engage in politics or push any particular kinds of arguments very strongly, on the one hand. And to some degree, others argue that political science needs to take on a more of a public intellectual orientation in the United States. That is, be more directly focused on bringing attention to important questions. One example that I would give to you, a name that I'm sure many of you recognize, Robert Putnam, who's done some very well-known work on social capital in the United States and Italy and elsewhere. In some of his most recent work, he's been very specific and assertive that part of what he wants to do in his more recent research dealing with children in poverty in the United States is to try and have those be an important aspect, issues of children in poverty, be an aspect of the presidential election in the United States that will take place in the year 2016. So he's, in a sense, fairly specifically advocating, saying, look, here's some research I've done, here's what we found. There was a time in American history where there was a greater equality across classes, that children of different classes, social class backgrounds would go to school together. They could participate in sports and so on, and the school would pay for it. Now in the United States, we often have a situation where individuals who want to be in the band or participate in a sport have to pay for it themselves. And his argument is that by doing that, we are encouraging and reinforcing economic class divisions, and we need to be aware of that. And again, so his goal is to put this very much on the agenda, if you will. And there are other political scientists whose work has also done things along these lines. I would just mention the name that many of you are familiar with. Theda Skocpol, for example, is doing work where she has what she calls a scholars network. And part of what they are involved in is trying to, again, bring scholarship very much to the intellectual debates, the public policy debates in the United States, where many political scientists feel like we have been, in a sense, preempted by economists and others who have had a much greater influence and visibility in terms of discussing and debating public policy than we as political scientists have. All right. One last thing, well, let me just note two last things because I believe I'm beginning to run short on time, and I know Arantxa was very emphatic that I keep to my time because you need to go to the reception later, but is work with regard to the public presence of political science. So there was actually a task force of the American Political Science Association a year ago where a number of political scientists got together and said, here's what we need to do so that we can present issues to the public, to policymakers and so on, in a more clear-cut, persuasive way. And here's how to present it publicly. I mean, they're even doing these workshops on how to present effectively so that we as a discipline will be listening. One last set of issues that I will simply just mention in passing, but are, as I speak, in fact, at the American Political Science meetings that will occur in early September of this year, there will be a number of panels and a lot of debate about this, so this is shifting the discussion somewhat. But it has to do with research and what's called research transparency and research ethics. There have been a couple of instances in American politics, in the study of American politics, activities engaged in by American political scientists who have cast some shadow, if you will, over political science research. And I can't go into a lot of detail because time won't permit, but let me just say this, is that one of the initiatives is something called DART, D-A-R-T, DART, which means Data access, and research transparency. Data access and research transparency. And what's behind that is, again, trying to assure that research that is undertaken, we can be confident that the data were collected in an appropriate way, that the data can be analyzed or reanalyzed, replicated in a way that will try and assure that research is done achieving the highest levels of research integrity. And certainly we in the American Political Science Association support that very strongly. But yet again, to kind of come full circle from where I began, one of the things that does occur is that, as you might guess, scholars who do different kinds of political science research are concerned about how these not these new rules, but the rules that are being proposed will affect them in different ways. So if someone uses data that is already collected by a well-known agency, so for example, in the United States, as many of you know, we have the American National Election Studies. And it's a very sophisticated kind of organization that has been engaged in research going back 40 or 50 years. So data that is collected by them is generally accepted and acceptable. But there have been other forms of data collection over the last 6 years or so where there have been some questions raised. But then others who do other kinds of research where you do individual interviews. Let's say you're a comparative politics scholar who is interviewing someone in some village in India. How are we going to go about replicating that? It presents a whole different set of issues. It presents a whole different set of concerns. So one of the debates that is going on now, and I don't think is going to be resolved anytime soon, although we're going to have a number of meetings and panels discussing that in September, is around these issues of research integrity and transparency and replication and so on. So what you see here, I think, and I'd like to, in a sense, conclude by saying the issues and the tensions that I identified at the very outset about different epistemological traditions of research and research traditions and approaches that have been very much an issue over the last 30, 40 years or so in the United States, and perhaps in here as well, they kind of interweave and interconnect with each other in interesting and complex ways, I think. And someone mentioned to me that some people believe that in Spain what is occurring is, to some degree, an Americanization of Spanish political science. As an Americanist, I feel good and not so good about that. There are reasons to say, well, I think hopefully we have something to offer. We have some ideas and some research traditions and a lot of shared concerns and values around the fundamental purposes of political science. But, if you are moving toward an Americanized political science, walk carefully, thoughtfully. And let me end by thanking you for having me speak to you today. Thank you.